மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Well, a new day dawns at Chess Base headquarters, and we're going to kick off this session by looking at the chase variation. Now, this particular line is characterised by white pushing his pawns at a very early stage, trying to harass the black knight. And it's my contention that this variation will often be seen at lower levels, where white is hoping to catch out his opponent with something which is relatively uncommon. Among grandmasters, this variation has found favour with players such as Yevgeny Sveshnikov and Tosta Torhausen from Iceland. I think these guys see a possible opportunity to transpose back into lines which are very similar to the C3 Sicilian. And black must certainly react carefully to this line, and accurately. But I think with a well-timed b6, chipping away at white's centre, he obtains a good game. Now, there are basically two moves for white in this position. He can play either knight c3 or he can play bishop c4. And we're going to kick off this investigation by looking at a game of Sveshnikov's. He's playing white against Alekhine. This game was played in Russia, 1998. And in this particular game, white played knight to c3. After that, I'm recommending pawn up to e6, a relatively simple move. The main line goes d4, because after all, black was attacking c5 there. Black should take on c3 and then play b6. And now we reach the first critical position. Well, in the game Sveshnikov-Alekhine, Sveshnikov played a typically aggressive move, queen to g4. I dare say that move will not be the choice of most of your opponents. Most of them are going to take on b6. After which, black should, of course, recapture with the a-pawn, bringing his rook into the game and giving black what looks like, I believe, to be the more compact pawn structure. After that, queen g4 is the most common try, and now black has two pretty decent moves as far as I can see. And I'm going to use two games within a game to illustrate this. Now, there was a game, Chernayev versus Luther, Catalan Bay 2003, I think that's Gibraltar actually, where black played d5 in this position, going into a kind of French, where if white doesn't prosecute his attack, he's going to be left looking at weak pawns on the queen side. Black would hope to besiege those pawns and actually win them. The longer the game goes on, I get a feeling the more this is going to turn in favour of black. So in the game Chernayev versus Luther, white played knight h3, and play became very French-like after queen to d7. Knight f4, probably threatening knight to h5, so black stopped that with g6. And now white played bishop e2. Well, black displays very good timing in this game, because the instant that bishop moves on f1, black is ready with the counter bishop a6. This is a very common idea in this line. Black plays bishop a6, usually after white moves his king bishop. So black doesn't lose any time. And I think already black has got a pretty good position, because it's difficult for white to take the kingside attack any further. Anyway, Chernayev castled. Black played knight c6. White took on a6, rook takes a6. And now, of course, the big danger for white, of course, Chernayev's a very strong player. He senses the danger. The danger, as I said before, is that black can simply besiege those queenside pawns and win them. So white is committed already to outright attack. Well, outright attack is certainly what happened here. I don't know what you're going to make of this next sequence of moves. I think Chernayev thinks he's Mikhail Tal playing these moves, but if white didn't do something like this, then he's going to end up in a terrible mess. But this, to me, looks like a kind of desperation already. You know, white is sacrificing his entire pawn chain to blast open the position there. And so e6 was played. F takes e6, knight takes e6. Of course, black's got to be very careful here. You know, white's simply threatening ideas such as rook e1. There was a similar game of Tao's, I recall, against Donna, where something like this happened. But anyway, in this particular position, I think black is able to defend himself. Luther played the accurate move, knight e5. And now I don't know whether white had missed that move. It's a relatively simple move, but his problem is that Queen H3 is answered by B5, and White's attack grinds to a halt. So after Knight E5, White had to continue the sacrificial orgy with Knight takes C7 check. But after Queen takes C7, Queen E6 check, Bishop E7, Bishop B2, Rook F8, the attacker completely run out of steam. In fact, White doesn't have a good move in this position. It's hard to see anything for him at all. Given that Bishop takes E5 fails to Queen D7, and Black emerges from the complications with several extra pawns. So to cut a long story short, after Rook F8, Chimaev played Rook A D1, Black played Knight D3, and White resigned. So a game within a game where White was encouraged to go over the top. We go back to Queen G4 now. D5 is obviously one decent move for Black. Going to show you another option here, because I feel this is, probably the most critical line. In a game, Alvarado versus Wall, played in, I think, Spain 2004. Black plays slightly differently here, just to show you a different approach. You can actually play C5 in this position. Now we do get a position which is very similar to a C3 Sicilian. White played Knight F3, Black played Knight C6. And White brought his bishop out to D3. C takes D4. Already slightly awkward for White, because the most natural move, C takes D4, is answered by maybe Bishop B4 check. I mean, there might be other moves. This already starts to look a bit awkward. Knight B4 is also very interesting, with the idea that the knight's attacking the bishop. If the bishop moves to, say, E4 or something, then Black may even have moves such as Bishop A6, developing a very useful counterattack. So, back to C takes D4, with White's most natural move denied in this position. Once again, White felt that he had to sacrifice something in order to justify his play, and he castled. But of course, Black took on C3, and now White's burned his bridges. Really, he's got to win with a crushing attack, or he's just going to lose on material here. Well, just to take play on, it's hard to believe that Black is really troubled in this position. That bishop on F8 is a very sturdy defender. So Rook A5 was played. A4, Bishop B7, a bit like a C3 Sicilian with extras for Black. Black is actually material ahead and time ahead on a normal position. That Queen on G4 would only be intimidating if Black had castled, really. With the Black King still in the middle, it's hard to see what White's doing, really. So Bishop B7 was played, Rook A3, and now the excellent move Rook C5. And I think basically White is probably losing this position, given that Bishop E3, which is his most natural move, fails to Rook takes E5. And suddenly, after Knight takes E5, Knight takes E5, White finds that all his pieces are on pre. So it's very difficult after Rook C5 to suggest any advice, and in fact in the game White could find nothing better than the really miserable move Rook A1. Well, of course, after that Black is gaining time. Queen comes to C7, Bishop E4, Rook C4, again emphasising the uncomfortable nature of White's pieces. Finally, White seems to get his act into gear there with Queen H5. He might be threatening Knight to G5, so Black gets rid of him with G6. Queen comes to G5, and now another risky looking move, but one I don't think White can take advantage of. Pawn up to H6. White retreated with Queen G3. Well, of course, the natural instinct is to put the Queen on F6 in this position. I suppose Black would have answered that simply with Rook G8, taking sacrifices on G6 completely out of the equation, and in turn threatening Bishop E7. So I guess Queen G3 in the game was an attempt to keep in touch with G6 and E5. But the game didn't last much longer after that, because Black now started to cash in, offering an exchange of bishops. White doesn't want that. As I say, he's completely committed in this position. Bishop takes G6. Rook comes to g8. What else could we expect? Well, white's got to go for bishop takes f7 check and hope for the best. King takes h7, but well, it's very hard to believe this stuff. You know, white's only attacking with his queen, really. All of black's pieces are in good positions. And so after rook cg4, queen h5 check, I think, rook 8 to g6, knight h4, and then queen to c4. White had quite enough and resigned. So two miniatures, if you like, there in that particular line, demonstrating that perhaps, you know, this is not so easy to play for white. And going back to c takes b6, a takes b6, with the help of moves such as bishop a6 and with the more compact pawn structure, black may already have a pretty good game here. Which now brings us conveniently back to the main game and Sveshnikov's move queen to g4. I mean, obviously, a strong grandmaster like him can't be happy with developments like that. But of course, queen g4 immediately allows black to take on c5. And then, of course, this is what Soloshenkin does. In essence, this is a pawn sacrifice for white, which is not immediately convincing, but Sveshnikov had played this once before, and in that game, black had made a mistake. So let's just see what white is up to here. Okay, plays bishop g5, bishop e7 was played, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, and this is white's point. The queen comes down to g7, destroying the black king side. The problem can be baldly stated. White's only attacking with one piece, though. And after rook f8, knight f3, actually black can get away with c takes d4 in this position. Because, well, knight g5, I think, is answered simply by f5. And white runs out of steam there. So, let's just see bishop e2. Actually, I've just seen something else after knight g5. It just occurred to me now, I wonder whether black can get away with queen to a3 here. I mean, f5 might be a move, but how about queen a3? That might be even stronger. Point being that after knight e4, black can play bishop b7, knight f6 check, king e7. And now if white doesn't have a good move in this position, he's just completely lost, because the counter-attack is about to begin with interest. So perhaps that's why he doesn't go knight g5, which is, of course, what he wants to do if he can. Anyway, bishop e2. Pawn to f5. Yeah, I seem to recall in a previous game of Sveshnikov's, black had played f6, which is not quite so incisive. White goes queen h6, and he may have some initiative there. f5 is much more forcing. It keeps the square e4 under control, which is very, very important in this position. Of course, white doesn't want the queens off, so Sveshnikov went queen to h6. And now rook g8. And now we see the difference between f6 and f5 again. In the previous position, white might be considering e takes f6, whereas he can't do that now. And rook g8 is a careful move in that knight g5 has also been prevented. So white castles. Black plays bishop b7. White goes c takes d4. Incidentally, just in case you're wondering what happens after d takes c3, it's really risky to grab those pawns. The problem with black's position, if he has one, is that his king is stuck in the middle. So white's got a little bit of time here to play with, and so a move like queen e3 might be awkward to meet. White's rooks are connected, his king is relatively safe. Although black's material ahead, I wouldn't be so happy about playing his position here. I think he could be quite vulnerable to a quick attack. So the point is, of course, it's better to develop your pieces than to get involved in pawn grabbing in the opening. So bishop b7 is what most strong players would do. C takes d4, and now bishop to d5. Excellent move, stationing that piece on a very good square in the middle. What's the evaluation of this position? Well, obviously black's king is exposed. On the other hand, you know, it could be that g2 might become very weak. Black's got well-placed pieces. He has possibilities of attacking white's pawn chain, particularly the pawn on d4. And black's got pressure along the g-file, without doubt, and along the long diagonal. The focal point seems to be g2 in all this. So it's very difficult to assess this position correctly. Very unclear. I mean, you know, there are certain positions where the word unclear was designed for, and this is just one of them. Probably the better player is going to win. Anyway, rook fd1 was played, and of course black continued development with knight c6. White played knight to e1. Perhaps he's hoping to trade off that very powerful bishop on d5 with a move like bishop f3. And black answered that with rook to b8. So all of black's pieces are now in play. Rook a b1. And now another good move, rook to b6. Well, obviously black can win a pawn in this position, but winning such pawns is really risky. You know, the pawn grab goes like this: rook takes b1, rook takes b1, bishop takes a2. But I would guard against such moves when your king is stuck in the middle. I mean, I think rook b7 gives black some problems, really. He's probably got to go king d8. And after that, well, let's see. White's bound to have some good moves here. How about just bishop b5? This looks strong. Threatening bishop takes c6, damaging the pawns, and then even rook takes a7. When black's king, stuck on the back rank, is bound to become weak. So that wasn't the idea in playing rook b8 at all. No, Sholoshenkin intended rook b6 there with a sturdy defence on the b file. Okay, white intends to break that defence with a4. King d8 was played. White can't play a5 just yet. Instead, he returns his queen to the centre of the board, perhaps threatening a5 now. And now black plays queen out to a3. Stopping a5 again, hitting a4. Maybe the queen can join in the action on the king side even with moves like queen to h3. But at any rate, that's a pretty good move, I would say. And white offers a draw with queen to h6. Okay, well, it's just a question of whether black wants to take that draw. I think in view of the more compact pawn structure, probably black is slightly better in this position, but Sholoshenkin decided, okay, well, if he wants a draw, I'm going to take it with queen e7. And certainly white should return his queen to d2 with a kind of balance. I believe this is the right result for such a position. Both sides have their strengths and weaknesses. Both sides have their trumps. I believe white should play queen d2 in this position. But in typically optimistic fashion, Sveshnikov decided to play on with rook b5. And I think this is probably misguided, as we're going to see. Because after rook b5, black has two good moves. The first of these is the game move, queen to g7. You know, I just think that's a good move, improving the position of the queen and attacking g2 and threatening an exchange of queens. Exchange of queens tends to favour black, who has the better pawn structure. If black didn't like that, well, I think there might be an even better move here with bishop b3. This suddenly exposes the weak aspects of white's position. The pawn a4 hangs, the rook on d1 hangs. It could be that, you know, after rook d2, black can simply grab that pawn with bishop takes a4. And if white has to go rook takes b6, a takes b6, queen e3, queen b4, then I don't necessarily believe it anymore for white. You know, I think black is a pawn up in this position, and white will struggle to prove compensation. However, it seems that on that day, Sholoshenkin, you know, preferred to play it safe, so queen g7 was his choice. Well, queen h3 is the only move to play on, really, if white wants to make anything of this position. I mean, he could take on g7, but then after rook takes, only black can be better with his beautifully centralised position there, and that weak white pawn on d4. So queen h3 was played, and black played knight e7. I think he's intending perhaps an excursion up to f4 in that position if allowed. White played rook db1. Black played bishop c6. Well, of course, that does force white's hand. And now a5 was probably Sveshnikov's optimistic idea. He wants to open up the position and get down to the back rank there. But it's not quite so easy. Now black has two nicely centralised pieces there on d5 and c6, and threatens knight f4 direct. Alright, bishop f3 was played. Queen comes up to g5. White plays g3, blocking the file. Knight comes into c3, not a move white wants to see. Rook a1. And now knight to e4. There's not much to say about this position apart from the fact that with every move, black is improving the coordination of his pieces. a8 safely covered, so there's no way in for white there. And if white takes on b6 in this position, black simply recaptures. And the net effect of that capture is just to give the black king a bit more room. So going back to knight e4, white decided to take on h7. B takes a5. And now rook comes to b1. Another very optimistic move. Perhaps this was white's last chance to get an equal position here. I think probably he should play rook takes a5 in this position. And it's quite hard for black to actually take this position any further. So a natural sequence might run rook g7, queen h8 check, rook g8, queen h7, with repetition of moves. Again, I believe that should have been a logical continuation. But Sveshnikov again refrains from that continuation. And this time I think he goes over the top with rook b1, because he's overestimating his chances very clearly, in my view here. King c8 was the accurate response. And that probably finishes white's hopes of attack. I mean, the problem for white is, of course, he's left black with an extra pawn. So it is far too optimistic to play like this. I mean, white played bishop e2 there. Maybe both players were in time trouble and white was trying to scramble something out of this position. But certainly it's easy to deal with his transparent threat of bishop a6 check. So bishop b7 was played. White goes queen h3. And a move like that tends to indicate time shortage, because now black played a crushing move, knight to c3. All right, rook takes b7, knight takes e2. It gets much simpler to understand this game now, because, well, black is masses of material ahead. So the rest of the moves don't really require much comment. It's a great player. Alekhine is 2500 or something, just cleaning up. And there's nothing white can do about it. So I will refrain from commenting too much on these moves, because, frankly, white could have resigned this position. It's just a bit of a king chase. King goes back, black's closing in for the kill, and now, with everything under control, he just pushes his a-pawn. Probably white was disappointed. I think that's the only reason we can really explain why he's playing on. Queen c2 was played. Well, that's just one of those things. Eventually the rook comes into the game. The game's going on much longer than it should. Black drives out the blockader, a check before dying, and that was that. So the last 10-15 moves are completely irrelevant, but I think you can get the feeling of the chase variation from just looking at this one game. It's a complicated line which promotes a tough middle game position, and so that's the story. Let's go on to look at another game in this variation now, and consider that.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.